Previously on the psychology of entrepreneurship.
We've been coming behind for centuries now. This is rollover from the Civil War and the abolition of slavery. It's important to understand that prison forces you to be social. You don't have much of a choice. Even those who would rather just withdraw into their cell and not talk with people have certainly a lot of trouble. So I think it's important to know that even though a lot of people or most people believe that prisons are there to keep society safe, prisons are indicative of society's failures.
It's nefarious, man. Like, the brain works in fucked up ways.
The mind is one of the most deceiving, manipulative pieces of equipment, flesh, human bodies on earth. I never have trusted my brain.
All of that weight lives in your head, and you are the decision maker.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
Hi, it's Ronsley. If this is your first volume, welcome. This is a weekly series where I go inside the mind of an entrepreneur, artist, athlete, academic to decipher what is the psychology of our decisions. I'm Australian, and I'd like to acknowledge our traditional custodians of country where I live and work. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge our continuous connection and contribution to land, sea, and community. We've all been looking forward to 2020 ending. Well, some of us. Me personally, don't really care about New Year's. Every day is just a day. It drives Rochelle insane. Rochelle, my wife, she cares about days and dates and milestones. Not sure how she landed up with me, a Grinch, as a husband, but the reason I bring this up is because I used to be the exact opposite. Could not have imagined turning out this way. I used to have gym memberships with attendance in January that never got used, new subscriptions for online stuff that never get used for the rest of the year. But also things like I started off podcasting 7 or 8 years ago talking about food and why it was important to fuel our body with the right food and not something necessarily that came from a packet. I could never have imagined having the conversations I've had to this date, and a lot of that I could not have planned. I definitely couldn't have planned having a conversation with this gentleman.
This is a Global Tel Link prepaid call from
Michael Braxton,
an inmate at Central Prison. This call will be monitored and recorded for customer assistance, collection, or complaint procedures, or to future. Thank you for using Global Tel Link.
My name is Arlene. I'm on death row. I've been in prison for a little over 27 and a half years. I've been on death row since 1997, November 21st. To be exact. I'm a co-author of the book Crimson Letters, Voices from Death Row, with Tessie Castillo and 3 other death row inmates. We wrote the book a couple of years ago and, finally got it published. And I'm also a MC with music that I'm releasing live on death row. Some projects I'm working on as well.
Can you imagine what it's like to be in jail for 27 years? Alim, do you feel any hope after all this time?
At the time when I definitely embraced that, notion of despair or hopelessness, it was just the reality or the feeling that I was powerless, that I had no, sway or influence on the outcome of any events that were happening. And so I just found at that time more solace, more peace of mind, if you will, in, just being completely and utterly hopeless and despairing and just expecting everything that was possibly the worst that was going to happen is what was going to happen. But, ultimately for me is that I do think that state of mind was a bit debilitating and it wasn't helpful, but and as I mentioned, as far as in my spiritual growth and development, is that it's still similar as me recognizing, that I do have some type of power. I do have some type of outcome, influence on the outcome based on either what I believe how I think or how I act. And as I said, is that sometimes those thoughts or actions may not manifest into their fullest capacity in immediate results in this life. Is that when I was able to embrace that concept and believe in that reality, that as long as I, consciously think and believe and try to act in a way that is good, is positive, is, out of compassion or love or mercy or, empathy for other people, then I felt and I still feel that I am in control of the consequences that may happen to me.
Is it weird for you to hear someone that is confined in this space to say that he is in control of the consequences that may happen to him? It definitely took me by surprise. And while you're listening and thinking about that, I know you're also wondering what it was like before Alim got to prison. I was definitely thinking about that. Well, Alim?
One of the most defining experiences for me is my racial identity. My mother is white. My father is black. And, I was born in 1973 in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is in the South. And, being in the time period that I was born in and in the South, in the geographical area I was born in and raised in, is that I was an anomaly. That there weren't, any other people like me, and my mother's family totally were opposed to any type of interracial relationships. So she was cut off from her family as a result of giving birth to me. And my father went to prison while my mom was pregnant with me. And so therefore I was raised up as a child in low income housing projects in Raleigh, North Carolina by a single white mother in a predominantly black neighborhood. And that race became a defining experience that defined how I felt about myself, how I felt about the world around me, and it defined my interactions with people. Is that I developed a very, very strong sense of self-hatred for who I was. Is that I felt ashamed based on my racial identity. Is that I was made to feel that I didn't belong to any of the races that were around me. I was alone.
Did you know that until federally overturned in 1967, most US states banned marriages and relationships between white and non-white people? Before this was overturned, biracial and multiracial children were considered illicit results of such illegal marriages and relationships.
Through the psychology of entrepreneurship and all the volumes we've done, race and minorities come up over and over and over again. And I bet, just like myself, you've put Alim in some sort of a box. I bet you didn't think that Alim is actually a minority in prison.
In prison, definitely, white people are the minority. And, being honest is, for the most part, in my experience is that they kind of are pretty oppressed in a lot of situations. Being that it's majority black in prison, is that definitely aggression is, towards a lot of whites. For instance, I've definitely known numerous occasions where, comments about white people, might be just thrown around, in a derogatory way, and white people might be sitting right there, but feel, defenseless to, stand up or say anything because they just, surely outnumbered. So yeah, that's the reality. And it's weird because it's like, from my experience is, being biracial is that, I don't walk around with an identity tag or nothing that identifies me as being, biracial. So I live the experience of a black person. So my experiences are, the experience of the black people experience. However, so it gives me like some type of unique privilege of navigating between two worlds because, when you mentioned earlier, asking me about certain type of stereotypes or, racial attitudes that other people might just, not really understand until later on. There's a lot of times, just being that I live in, amongst black people and, without any, question, is that I can hear comments about stereotypical attitudes about white people or white women that may be just thrown out. And I might be inwardly uncomfortable and kind of even cringing sometimes over some of this stuff because I'm like, yo, man, my mom's white, or my uncle's white, and, if a certain person acts this way and they say, oh, that's a redneck, or he don't like black people, you know what I'm saying? And it's not based on anything that the person may have actually done, but just maybe the way he looks or his lifestyle or something like that. And those stereotypes may have be associated with, this is the part of the people that, hate black people, and I'm like, I got an uncle that's just like that, and he's all right, you know what I'm saying?
You must have thought at some point, what is Alim doing on the psychology of entrepreneurship? Well, Alim is a performing artist from death row. You can find links to his work in the show notes at psychologyoфentrepreneurship.com. But one of the last things you hear when a judge sentences you to death is,
you are hereby remanded and without bail to the custody of the sheriffs of the Brevard County to be delivered for commitment to the Department of Corrections, where you will be confined until final execution of this judgment and sentence prescribed by law. Mr. Bradley, may God have mercy upon your soul. This court is now in recess.
That line, may God have mercy on your soul, I asked Alim how he felt about that.
That was terrifying because, as I mentioned, is that it kind of, made me feel like no longer was this just a worldly event that was happening, but it was, even a divine consequence. May God have mercy on your soul. It just invoked, the divine into this judgment here. That was soul shaking, and it still is, But I have, grown in many regards, and especially in my faith, and I've repented for my actions and sought forgiveness for God, and I am striving to, make some efforts to do amends in this life. And, as far as the music and the album, yeah, I've been working really hard on releasing my music. I just actually got a deal for someone that's going to distribute my music starting next year. And we are putting together an album. Currently, I just have music placed on SoundCloud, as I mentioned in the book, Rome, which is my MC name. But, stay tuned, man. I got music coming out. I got an album that's going to be dropping probably around between July and October of 2021.
You know what? I also asked him if he feels responsible for what he's done.
I definitely feel responsible for my actions. I don't feel like, I was just I'm an observer as things, were occurring. You know what I'm saying? I was definitely responsible for the things that I did. However, is that, yeah, you spot on in the context of, like snowballing. You know what I'm saying? One thing after another, a series of bad events is that, one bad event leads to another bad event. One bad decision leads to another bad decision. Whereas that I thought that I was making good decisions, maybe not good in the moral context, but in the aspect of what the right or the best thing to do was in this situation. But it was actually just snowballing and making a situation worse and worse and worse. And, that's in reality what happened. So, but as I say, is that I take responsibility of that. And so, and when in retrospect, is that for many years, is that, yeah, I might have been in the perspective of just trying to give blame to other people or to other things or circumstances, and being that passive observer of how things went down. But, taking full account of, my life and being fair and honest with myself, is that I have to take responsibility for my actions and saying, hey, it was my choice, my decision that resulted in this. And then that happened, and yeah, okay, I made another bad decision. And it was just a snowballing, effect of bad decisions, to counter the original bad decision. And that's the way things actually happen.
I bet you must be thinking, what has he done, Ronsley? I want to know what he's done. Well, when we come back, Aleem takes us through how he exactly got into jail, including how the gun went off.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
Our aim with this audio documentary has always been to build a strong community of entrepreneurs and creatives to provide a space where they can use their voice to share their authenticity with the world. As a valued listener, your voice matters too. We love to hear your feedback and ideas, so don't be shy to let us know how we're doing in the ratings and comments. If you have a message for our production team or know someone who would be a perfect fit as a guest, you can find out more information on how to share your input at psychologyofentrepreneurship.com.
Welcome back. Speaking to Aleem, it is hard to ignore that he is not the same as other people I speak to. He's quite different. I hear that people gravitate towards him in a room. His self-awareness is off the charts. And I was getting this feeling, and then he started to say this.
For one, let me just speak on the aspect of love and empathy and compassion that you started with. Is that one thing that I have recognized within myself is that, and I have a tendency to project, is the things that I feel or think, is that I have a tendency to say, well, other people think or feel the same way. Sometimes that I may be confronted with realities that may prove me wrong in that regard, but nonetheless, it's just innate within me, is I have a tendency to project and think that other people feel the same way or think the same way. So in me and my personal experience is that regardless of anything that I've done, any of my experiences, is that I've always felt that I was deserving of mercy. I was deserving of compassion. If the people really just understood me and understood, the motives or the experiences that shaped me, and thus, if they walked a mile in my shoes, that they may be able to, understand or appreciate and not judge me in a harsh manner. And so I feel like that every single person feels that same way about themselves. And so every person, I feel like, believes that they are misunderstood, that they are deserving of mercy or compassion. So in that context, that's what develops for me empathy, is that, putting myself in other people's shoes and saying, how do they feel? Because it's easy for me to judge a person, actions and say, man, this guy here is the worst piece of crap I ever met in my life, and because of what he's doing or what he's saying. But I could turn that mirror on myself and say, Aleem, there's probably 100 or 1,000, maybe more people that might feel the same way about you and think that you're the worst piece of crap that was ever born, and, et cetera. So if I can recognize within myself that, I feel that I am somebody that's redeemable, somebody that's worthy of redemption and salvation, and, I have to feel that same way about other people. So in that context, that is what I mean by love and compassion and empathy for other people.
Are you deserving of love and compassion? Are you deserving of a second chance? Because if you feel like someone else doesn't deserve a second chance, chances are you are extremely hard on yourself when you mess things up. While you ponder that, I would like you to ponder this. Do you think you really know what someone else's background really looks like? We say we understand, but do we really? We don't. Stop kidding yourself. It's hard to sometimes empathize with people we know and love. Of course, it's hard to understand, and we don't understand people that we haven't even met. And I bet you didn't think that Aleem's background looked like, well, I'll let him tell you.
I've been getting in trouble, since I was about 16, getting in and out of jail. Started drinking, smoking weed, skipping school, dropped out of school, got kicked out of school, then just going to jail, going to prison for petty crimes, stealing, fighting, things like that. And it was in 1992, which was like my last prison stint before the current prison stint. Because I had met some people in prison. I was just exposed to different attitudes, different ideas about crime. And at that time, I was around people that was, drug dealers, that they was locked up for selling drugs. And I wanted to be a part of that life. the glamorization of, nice cars and jewelry and expensive clothes. And, I just didn't come from a background that had access to that type of lifestyle. So, for the first time, my eyes kind of got on that prize. And when I was released in 1992, those were some of the things that I wanted. And so I wanted to be a part of the drug dealer lifestyle. But I didn't have a door. I didn't have the key. I didn't have access to that world. And when I got out of prison, wasn't less than 2 weeks after I got out of prison, I had met a friend that lived in my neighborhood who, was into robbing people. And it just blew my mind because I was like, wait a minute, you robbing? And he said, yeah, and I couldn't believe that he could do something like this and get away with it. And he convinced me, yeah, it's easy, we can get away with it. And, in less than 2 weeks after I was out of prison is that I ended up participating in a robbery. And it was very easy. I got away with it. And after that, it just became a habitual type of criminal activity that I was involved in for about 2 months, is that I started robbing people. And as a consequence of that is that, I eventually, ended up killing 2 people. And that, the situation that resulted in that is, you always go back and try to reanalyze if I'd have did this, I'd have did that, blah, 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 blah. But the reality was, I take full responsibility for my actions. I kind of, at the time, is that, I felt like the situation had got out of control, and I felt like I had to be the one that could, keep everything in control. So we had set out that night, me and a couple of other guys had set out to go out and perform some robberies. And in the course of that is that a guy just walked up to us, and we ended up kidnapping him, taking his car, putting him in the trunk of his car with the idea that we were going to drive around, use his car for a getaway car to perform some robberies. And then, I guess we were just going to let it go and, move on. It was all spontaneous. None of this stuff was thought out. We were just, a bunch of kids. I was 19. My co-defendant was 18 and another one was 20. And we just drove around performing robberies that night. And eventually I went into a store and, the robbery just went bad, and I ended up shooting the clerk by mistake. Didn't even intend to shoot him. The gun went off. I had tried to fire a shot into the air, to the ceiling, and the gun jammed. And then when I tried to reload it, is that it just went off and shot the clerk. And, I just kind of scared the crap out of me. But I killed him. And as a consequence of that, out of fear and wanting to try to cover up and get away with that, is that I shot and killed the person that we had kidnapped and had held in the trunk throughout that night. And, these were some horrible things. I take full responsibility for that. That's what led me to prison. While I was in prison, is that I got, immersed into the prison lifestyle and, the hustle and bustle of this lifestyle in prison. And I started, being involved in criminal activity in prison, selling drugs, loaning money, running gambling enterprises. And as a result of that is that had a conflict with another inmate, and I ended up killing him in 1996. And as a consequence of that, I got the death sentence.
There's currently no evidence that suggests that the death penalty reduces crime. In fact, the American South has the highest murder rate in the country and oversees 81% of the nation's executions. So what is a more suitable punishment for brutal crime? Besides being more logical financially, sentencing someone to life imprisonment over the death penalty is something that the general public have started to agree on in recent years, as it is a more humane form of punishment and reduces the risk of someone innocent being wrongfully executed.
When I listen to how Alim got to jail, I can't help but think that born in different circumstances, in different environments, that it could have been me. But we all in life face circumstances that without the perspective, it feels like the end of the world to us, and our world feels like it ends. We feel despair and we feel like there's no hope. Who better to give us advice than someone who's been in jail for 27 years? So when you go through that again, remember this.
I think I have a line in the book that I may have quoted that says, we learn to embrace despair and fight against hope. That was a phrase that I kind of coined, from my personal experience of, being in prison, being on death row, doing numerous years in solitary confinement, and, the torture or agony that I could say that, hope had me experiencing, because hope in prison can be a huge devastation. When you hope for something and you constantly are let down, there's so many situations that have happened in my 27 plus years of imprisonment that have inspired me to have a great amount of hope and faith and belief that the outcome was going to be advantageous, it's going to be favorable, that it's going to be a break, that it's going to open up a door, opportunity for me. And then to be crushed, to be disappointed, to be let down, it just made the experience of confinement, imprisonment, start all over again. It was devastating. So it became easier for me to embrace the notion of despair, of hopelessness, is to just give up on any idea that anything good was going to come to me or anything, to hope for was going to happen. If I just embraced, the despair of my reality, then, it didn't crush me anymore. I could deal with it, I could cope with it, and, just try to make the best of my circumstance. So that was definitely initially a phase that I experienced for quite a bit of time. But I have to say is that I turned that ultimately on its head, through my spiritual growth and transformation. Is that when I became a believer in Islam and a practitioner of the faith of Islam, is that my faith in God was able to nurture me into the perspective of hope that was greater than just this world, greater than just the consequences of the actions of this life. And that definitely, developed in me a greater concept of hope. And when I didn't place just the outcome of my faith in actions that may or may not result in good consequences in this life, is that just gave me a fuller understanding and a fuller perspective of hope.
See, perspective is key. This is Angela Popplewell's TEDx talk titled The Life-Altering Power of Perspective. And you've got to watch the whole talk, but I'd love for you to notice how she has an amazing perspective on herself and her actions. People call that trait self-awareness.
You see, prior to New York City, I lived in some communities in India with a gypsy community in Romania. This is really pixelated because it was taken on a disposable camera in 2006. Technology's come a long way. And I felt so alive there. I had never really left Tallahassee and gone abroad like that before. And the people I met there were so inspiring. Their stories are incredible. The circumstances they live in and they thrive in these marginalized communities taught me so much about the human race. I felt so alive. And then I came back home and I started to, I was sleeping and I had a feather bed and I had lattes and I had all these things that seemed very frilly, and I started to feel very depressed and very depleted. I started to feel a lot of feelings of feeling guilty or pity for the people, or why was I born here, and the people that I fell in love with in India, Romania, were born there, and it's so unfair. And in all honesty, I felt really dark and depleted in all the ways. It's really obnoxious for a privileged Westerner to feel dark and depleted, you know what I mean? And I began to realize that something was so broken within me, I didn't really know how to function. So New York City was my last-ditch effort at trying to reawaken my heartbeat, so to speak. I think what really had happened is I had kind of reversed the narrative. I went abroad to try to get to know situations and help people, but what had really happened was I had kind of turned into this person suffering from a superhero complex, and I was trying to save these people, which sounds really disgusting, I admit. And in my line of work, that's a very vulnerable thing to admit, that I can sometimes suffer from superhero complex in the nonprofit sector.
You curious about what she does? Well, she's helped create a platform that captures different perspectives.
So as fate would have it, though, in New York City, I had one of the greatest privileges of my life. I befriended a community that ultimately this group of friends was responsible for building out the robust model of what 100 Cameras is today. And 100 Cameras, what we seek to do is we work with kids living in marginalized communities all across the world. And we teach them that their perspective matters, and we teach them that the way they see their world is important. They can capture realities in those communities in ways that I, as a Western foreigner with a camera from the outside looking in, just simply cannot do. They can tell in such a true, untainted way that still shows that life is beautiful to them. They're documenting things in their world that shouldn't be that way. Kids are walking hours to get water that oftentimes is not clean water. They're going to schools in huts. They've actually suffered from what starvation feels like. We know life shouldn't be this way for them, but they're showing it in a way that has such hope and joy and has such dignity as a fellow human.
You know, part of me having these conversations that frankly few people on the planet get to have, I feel extreme privilege to be in that position for sure. But what I love more than anything else is a shift of perspective while I'm having these conversations. It helps me with my blind spots because, you know, we all have them. So before we wrap up this volume, this first line that Aleem says here just blew my mind when I heard it because I never thought of it from his perspective. And it confirmed my intuition about always not knowing more than I actually think I know.
Being in prison, obviously, and being under sentence of death is that, you know, frankly, I'm not even supposed to be alive, you know, so the fact that I have survived, you know, for the last 23 years on death row, is a feat in and of itself. It's something like in here on death row is that we have a kind of a culture where whenever we have a birthday, we feel like it's a great celebration, and we celebrate our birthdays because, you know, this is our way of saying that we have survived another year when, you know, the circumstances are not intended for us to survive to see another birthday. So the fact that I have continued to live, you know, this is a form of protest, a form of resistance, a form of, you know, defying the sentence that, you know, I was sentenced to. So in that context, is just being alive, you know, is something that is a huge accomplishment for me. I never envisioned, being honest, I never envisioned that I would live to be 40. And some of my writings and some of my songs, the lyrics to some of my songs is that I didn't envision that I would live to be 40. And it's really, I kind of didn't anticipate that I would live maybe beyond 30. So to still be here, to still be able to work and pursue some of my ambitions are things that, you know, I never really gave a lot of thoughts to. I didn't believe it was possible for me. But throughout the years, so many things have happened to me personally, things that have happened, you know, as far as my spiritual and moral and emotional and psychological growth and evolution that has, you know, drastically changed my outlook on myself, on, you know, my surroundings, as well as on life and my purpose in life.
Psychology of
Entrepreneurship. Coming up on the psychology of entrepreneurship.
When I was about 17, it was my first stint on prison. And I was like a nervous wreck. Like, this is prison, and I'm here. Like, I'm still kind of trying to fathom what next months and years will be like for me. And I was just all over the place. Especially for someone who is entering into the prison system for the first time, it is the scariest feeling in the world. Because I honestly didn't know if I would make it. Like, I thought that I was like entering into the last days of my life. I am a work in progress. I really am. Some days I wake up and man, it's still a struggle. It's still a struggle to get to that point where I am okay.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
I interviewed Aleem because Michael Jerome Braxton, which is his name before he converted to Islam, who's also known as Aleem, is a rapper and spiritual leader on North Carolina's death row. A reformed prisoner known as Rome Alone in the rap world, he has the distinction of being the only rapper in the world to release music from death row. He is also a recording artist with several songs currently featured on SoundCloud. Go to soundcloud.com/rromealone, and that link will be in the show notes. And he's got an upcoming album entitled Mercy on My Soul. He serves as an imam, a spiritual leader for Muslim men in Central Prison's death row. He has been on death row for 27 years, and 10 of which he spent in solitary confinement. He came to death row after stabbing a fellow prisoner to death in 1997. He is a deep thinker, a spiritual leader, and a recording artist.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
This is a Must Amplify production. Special thanks to every guest expert that has appeared on the show. Editing, voiceovers, and sound design by Kaylee Bonnyman and Tiago Vega. Guest research by Jenna Elliott. Content by Corinne Castles. Project managed by the legend that is Kaylee Bonnyman. Produced and hosted by me, Ronsley Vaz. For more episodes and where to listen, go to mustamplify.com/POE.
Love the polished audio docuseries style of this podcast, The Psychology of Entrepreneurship? At We Are Podcast, you can learn how to create a similar style for your own show. This revolutionary virtual event assembles podcasters, entrepreneurs, and marketers in one spot, so you're able to learn from the masters. Head straight to wearepodcast.com to reserve your spot at our next event.